American Pickers star Frank Fritz has died at the age of 60 after suffering a devastating stroke 2 years ago.
Frank Fritz claimed his best friend of 40 years never once called him while he was lying in a hospital bed recovering with metal rods in his spine. For years, fans of American Pickers believed Frank and Mike Wolfe shared one of reality television's closest friendships. But behind the cameras, something had clearly broken, and Frank eventually revealed a very different version of their relationship. Then, after Frank's death, even more details surfaced, complicating the story viewers thought they knew. So what really happened between Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe? And why did their decades-long friendship collapse so publicly in the end? Join us as we find out what Frank Fritz revealed about Mike Wolfe before he died. The silence he could not forgive. Frank Fritz gave an interview to the United States Sun in July 2021. He had kept these feelings to himself through 2 years of surgery, addiction treatment, and watching the show continue without him. Mike had not called once, and Frank said he knew exactly how severe the back injury was. Not Mike, and nobody else from the show either. Frank said the show had been completely centered around Mike. He said he no longer felt treated like a partner or even a friend. And he said he believed Mike was working to install his brother Robbie as his permanent replacement. Fans who suspected tension between them finally heard Frank address it directly. The show's comment sections filled with anger. Tributes to Frank started circulating. Fans suddenly started seeing the show differently, from a beloved road show to a story about one man being gradually removed from the show while his health collapsed. Mike's official response came through a brief Instagram statement. He said he would miss Frank, just like all the viewers would, and that he was praying for everything good on the next part of Frank's journey. The message sounded supportive, and Frank publicly stated it had been written by someone else entirely. He said Mike had not personally reached out to him, and that in 10 years of working together, Mike had not said 5 genuinely kind things to him unless they were both laughing at someone else. Frank was very specific about how he felt. He was describing a 40-year relationship he no longer believed was genuine, and he was saying it while the show was still on the air. Danielle Colby, the show's third original cast member, stood by Mike during that period and said nothing about Frank. In August 2021, Mike addressed the issue. He said the team cared about Frank and wanted him back. He said he would love to speak with him again. He then added that Frank was going through a lot personally with his addictions, and that Frank had made decisions that had led him to where he was. Around that same period, reports had also surfaced about Frank's off-camera struggles becoming more serious. In 2017, he had been arrested for operating while intoxicated after driving the wrong way on an interstate in Iowa. He later entered treatment for alcohol addiction and spoke publicly about trying to get sober. By the time he disappeared from American Pickers, some fans saw him as a victim of the show, while others believed the production may have felt they could no longer rely on him professionally. That tension between personal loyalty and business reality became a major part of how people interpreted the fallout. Those comments hit people hard because Frank and Mike went back long before television. How do two men who spent 40 years building something real together end up in a place where one of them is publicly calling the other a stranger who never cared? The answer starts long before the cameras and longer before the money. They were brothers before the cameras. Two men from Iowa were already doing exactly what the show would later make famous, driving back roads with no destination, stopping at barns and farmhouses, digging through things most people walked past without a second look. No cameras, no producers, no network deals, just Frank Fritz and Mike Wolfe, driving around Iowa looking for old pieces of Americana. They had known each other for over 20 years before a single episode ever aired. Their chemistry on screen was real. It was 20 years of genuine friendship, and it showed. They could finish each other's sentences on camera because they had been doing it long before any audience was watching. When American Pickers premiered in January 2010, it broke records. It became the highest-rated debut for the History Channel since 2007. Viewers locked in immediately. People tuned in more for Frank and Mike than the antiques. It was the two men finding them that kept people watching. Frank also brought a very different personality to the show than Mike. Mike was usually the salesman and negotiator, always pushing the business forward. Frank came across as quieter, awkward at times, and more unpredictable. He was the one getting distracted by old toys, rusted signs, or strange little collectibles that most people would ignore. For a lot of viewers, that balance was the entire appeal of the show. Mike gave the series momentum, but Frank made it feel authentic and unpolished in a way reality television usually does not. What Mike could not replicate alone was Frank's specific expertise. He specialized in toys, oil cans, and advertising items. He had a great eye for vintage Americana that he had been developing since childhood in Davenport, Iowa, long before fame or television money entered the picture. By 2015, 5 years into the show's run, Frank had quietly built a 3,240-square-foot warehouse on his Iowa property, packed with motorcycles, collectibles, and decades of expert picks that no camera crew had ever fully seen. He even wrote an entire book on picking vintage motorcycles, not as a celebrity project, but as a deeply technical guide from someone who had spent most of his adult life thinking about nothing else. For 10 years, the show worked because Frank and Mike genuinely enjoyed being around each other. But what viewers did not fully understand was this. While Frank and Mike were driving back roads and building something millions of people loved, Frank's body was already working against him in ways that would eventually cost him everything. How do you lose a 20-year friendship, a television career, and your health all at once? And which one went first? He was losing the fight nobody knew about. Since the 1990s, Frank had been living with Crohn's disease, quietly, privately, without talking publicly about it. He only disclosed it in 2013, 3 years into the show's run. What most people didn't know was that the medication keeping his Crohn's manageable caused another serious problem. It was slowly weakening his bones. In 2020, while moving heavy items at his Iowa home, he seriously injured his back. The surgery left him with 185 stitches, 2 permanent metal rods in his spine, and a prescription for opioid painkillers to get him through recovery. He became dependent on pain medication and drinking to manage what the medication didn't address. After years of this, everything started catching up with him at once. The show kept filming while Frank recovered. Season after season, the cameras rolled without him. Robbie Wolfe, Mike's brother, began appearing regularly beside Mike on the road. The longer it went on, the more permanent it looked. And Frank was not the only one who noticed. March 2nd, 2020, was the last time Frank Fritz appeared on American Pickers. The episode was called Burlesque Queen, an ordinary pick. At the time, nobody knew it would be his final episode. In the very next episode, he was gone. The show never explained why. There was no announcement and no acknowledgement that anything had changed. Fans began asking questions the show never answered. By January 2021, when season 22 returned after COVID production delays, Frank was still gone and Robbie was still there. The show did not explain that either. Frank stayed quiet through recovery, through treatment, through watching the show roll on without him. For over a year, fans had been asking questions the show refused to answer. In July 2021, he finally gave them one. Mike stayed mostly silent for the next 3 years, while Frank's health continued to decline. Then Frank suffered a stroke so severe that a court ruled he could no longer make decisions for himself. And when Mike finally showed up, it was not with a phone call. So what exactly did it take to get these two men back in the same room? He waited until Frank was gone. On July 14, 2022, a friend arrived at Frank's Iowa farmhouse and found him face down on the floor, unresponsive. The emergency call came in just before 11 in the morning. Frank had suffered a massive stroke. He was partially paralyzed, unable to move the right side of his body, and his speech was severely damaged. The stroke also worsened his long-standing Crohn's disease, which led to even more health problems that would define the rest of his life. Court documents filed shortly after were direct. Frank's ability to make decisions was so severely impaired that he could no longer care for his own safety, provide for basic necessities, or manage his finances. The stroke left him unable to manage basic daily decisions. An emergency conservatorship was established. His friend Chris Davis became his legal guardian. Midwest One Bank was appointed to manage his finances. Mike announced the stroke on Instagram and asked fans to pray. Frank was reportedly not pleased that the hospitalization had been made public. Even then, the tension between them had not gone away. Then, Memorial Day weekend, 2023. Frank and Mike saw each other in person for the first time in approximately 3 years. A mutual friend described both men as being in tears during the meeting. Mike brought up their first appearance on David Letterman, one of their earliest big public moments together. They talked about the beginning, about what they had built, about the impact the show had made. According to the friend who was present, they were not feuding. Whatever Frank had said publicly in 2021, whatever Mike had stayed silent about, none of it was louder than two old friends sitting together crying over something they had both lost. The on-screen reunion that Mike reportedly expressed interest in never came. Frank's health continued to deteriorate. He died on September 30th, 2024, at a hospice facility in Davenport, the city where he was born 60 years earlier. Mike was at his bedside. Weeks after Frank's death, Mike finally spoke. He told People magazine he wanted the world to know that they had loved each other like brothers. He described their bond as a once-in-a-lifetime friendship. He told the Daily Mail that Frank had been doing things he was not supposed to do, that the team had fought hard for him, that they had loved him, and that ultimately Frank had to be the one to make the decision to stop on his own. He acknowledged the bad press the situation had generated and expressed regret about how the public narrative had developed. But what Mike said painted a very different picture of the silence Frank had spent years calling abandonment. He hadn't gone silent because he didn't care. He had gone silent, he said, to protect Frank. He said he stayed quiet because he did not want Frank's personal struggles discussed publicly. By his own account, he stayed quiet while people criticized him, because saying the truth, he believed, would have done more damage to Frank than the silence did. Which means Frank spent his final public years accusing the one person who was actively trying to shield him. Both men kept their sides of the story mostly private. Frank never got the chance to respond to Mike's explanation. But what happened after Frank died suggested the people closest to him were not done fighting for him yet. Frank had spent decades quietly building a collection worth millions. And the moment he died, someone came forward to claim all of it. Someone whose name had not appeared anywhere near Frank's life in years. So what gives a man the right to walk into court and demand everything his estranged son left behind? Frank built it in silence. Someone else showed up to claim it. Frank Fritz died with an estate valued at approximately $6 million. A farmhouse he bought in 2010, a warehouse he constructed in 2015, and a motorcycle collection of antique toys, oil cans, vintage signs, and Americana he had personally selected because he knew their value better than almost anyone in the country. For a man who lived quietly in rural Iowa, drove a cargo van, and rarely discussed money publicly, many fans were surprised by how much it was worth. He had earned an estimated $300,000 to $500,000 per season during his television run. He spent it on the collection. The 2022 conservatorship paperwork filed after his stroke had stated clearly that Frank had no living relatives he maintained contact with. That specific language had been in the official court record for 2 years before Frank died. Then the estate was valued. And then William Fritz, Frank's father, living in Texas, filed a legal challenge. Bill argued that the will Frank had signed in October 2023, over a year before his death, while still under conservatorship, was not valid. Bill's argument was simple. A court had already ruled. Frank lacked the mental capacity to manage his own life. If that was true, how could he legally authorize a will? That created an obvious contradiction in the case. If the will was thrown out, everything went to the next of kin, and Bill was the next of kin. $6 million, the farmhouse, the warehouse, the motorcycle collection, would transfer to a man whose guardianship paperwork identified as having no maintained contact with his son. Frank's friends pushed back hard. They argued that Frank had been coherent when the will was made. They pointed to the fact that around the 2023 holiday season, Frank had been well enough to spend evenings out with friends. They described a man who, while still under conservatorship for financial and safety reasons, was still clear-minded enough to express genuine wishes about where everything he had spent decades building should go. Bill countered that he had been prevented from seeing his son and that the people defending the will were acting out of financial self-interest. The will has since been sealed by court order. The contents remain unknown to the public. The jury trial demanded in February 2025 has produced no confirmed verdict as of 2026. But while the courts decide what happens to everything Frank left behind, the show that put his name on screen had already ended. Not with a network announcement, not with a farewell episode, but with a birthday video from a woman who found out the same way everyone else did. So what did she say about Frank when she finally had the chance to say it publicly? Mike moves on without him. In December 2025, Danielle Colby turned 50 years old. She marked the occasion with an Instagram video that began as a birthday update and ended with news that surprised fans. She told her followers that she had just found out American Pickers was done. Not on hiatus or between seasons. Done. She said she was at a major turning point, that she had a plan in motion, and that without the show, moving forward was going to be difficult financially. The announcement came the same month the History Channel confirmed no new episodes were in production. In the same video, she spoke about Frank for the first time at length since his death. She said she had loved her time with him the most during the years before his addiction took hold. She said that after that, it had been difficult. By the time the show's final seasons aired, the audience had already made their feelings clear. The ratings dropped sharply. Fans consistently described the post-Frank era as feeling more commercial, more staged, and less spontaneous. What they were missing was exactly what Frank had always said made it real: the friendship. And by then, that was gone. In February 2026, Mike launched a new History Channel series called History's Greatest Picks. In interviews surrounding the premiere, He said he had been thinking about Frank constantly in the weeks leading up to the launch. He said he owed Frank for believing in him during the first show, and that the opportunity for the new one existed because of the foundation Frank had helped build. Frank gave his side from a hospital bed in Iowa. Mike gave his from a press tour. Only one of them got to decide how the story ends. He acknowledged the bad press the feud generated. The conflict was real, he said, but the whole story never became public, while both men were still alive to give it. Frank Fritz quietly built a collection and business worth millions. He gave everything to a show that made him famous, and still later made him feel pushed aside. He broke his silence publicly, at the cost of his reputation, and reconciled with his oldest friend in a room arranged by someone who still believed both men needed it, both of them in tears over memories of a television appearance they had been terrified to do together. And he died in the city where he was born, with Mike at his side. Despite everything that had happened between them, Mike was still there at the end. If Mike stayed silent to protect Frank, does that make Frank's public accusation unfair? Or does the silence itself, regardless of the reason, explain why Frank felt the way he did? And if Frank had known what Mike was actually protecting, would he have said any of it differently? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.